The claim is often made that if we accept subjective definitions of things like good and evil, that we then have no grounds to call people like Hitler and Stalin definitely evil, that it just becomes a matter of opinion, and anybody's opinion is as good as anybody else's. And it's only with an objective perspective on these things, an objective definition, that we can claim that these people are absolutely definitively evil. By the end of this video, I hope to show that it's actually the other way round. On with the video. Ladies and gentlemen, the YouTuber SamiZataari has made a video, Atheism's Problem Evil, in which he asserts that unless atheists can define evil in their own terms, then they shouldn't be able to use it as an argument against theists. Now, this to me seems a very wonky piece of logic right from the off. Even if I don't believe in evil myself, if it's an internal piece of your worldview and it contradicts another internal piece of your worldview, then surely I can critique your worldview on terms of its internal inconsistency. Surely I'm allowed to do that, even if I don't believe the concepts themselves. They're concepts that you're espousing, and if I find that one of those concepts jars against the other, then on those terms alone I should be allowed to tackle your argument. Now, there are some atheists who don't like the term evil, but I don't mind it, Sami, and I don't mind doing it. And I'm going to have a stab at defining evil for you. And then I want to get on to the more interesting stuff, which is to look around that and to contrast it with some other terms that we use. So, look, first, here's Sami, in his own words, asking the question.
The problem of evil, yet they never actually define what evil is. What is evil in the first place? What is right? What is wrong? So that's what I want to see. I want to see your definition of evil. I want to see your consistent, objective definition of evil and good. Objective.
Sami, listen, I don't mind you asking the question, but why does it have to be objective? Why does my definition have to fulfill your requirements? I mean, imagine if you'd asked me to define the term nice and told me it had to be objective. What would I do? I mean, Bob Geldof, he's clearly a nice man, isn't he? He's got to be a nice man. He's devoted years of his life to helping starving people in Africa. How could anybody say that he's not a nice man? And yet, he's not a very nice man. He's tetchy and irritable and aggressive and abrasive. He's not a very nice man. It's all subjective, isn't it? What we regard as nice and what we don't regard as nice is subjective. I couldn't give you an objective definition of nice. Could you give me one? So can you give me an objective definition of nice? Can you give me an objective definition of kind? Can you give me an objective definition of stocky? Because if you can give me objective definitions of these things, then I will attempt to give you an objective definition of evil. And by Christ, I hope you don't give me objective definitions of those, because outside of a theistic construct, I have no idea how to give an objective definition of evil. In fact, even inside a theistic framework, I don't really know how to do it. But there's bigger problems than that before I give you this definition, which is that to give you a definition, it's bound to be a gross simplification, Sami. Look, imagine if you said to me, I want you to give me the definition, the definitive reason of why people go shopping. I mean, what could be more simple than that? People go shopping to buy things, but they don't, do they? They also go shopping because they want to window shop. They want to see the things that they maybe want to buy next week, or the things that they can't afford to buy, that maybe they'll never be able to afford to buy, Sami. Things that they can only dream of. Perhaps they want to go and visit their friends and it's a shopping's a friend experience, or perhaps they're just a sad lonely bastard who never gets to see a normal human being, and the only time they get a bit of human comfort and companionship is when they walk out the front door and do a bit of shopping. How could I put a definition of that on a bit of paper, Sammy? I couldn't. So something like evil, which is 100 times more complicated, whatever definition I give you, you're going to be able to pick a hole in it. But I've had a stab anyway. So here we go. This is the definition that I've come up with, and then we're going to get on to the interesting part, because I want to look at what lies behind the definition and the difference it shows between me and you, and the arguments people like you make against this kind of definition that I'm making. Evil, adjective. A sentient agent or act of omission carried out by a sentient agent that, number one, purposefully causes suffering to other sentient agents for pleasure or personal edification. Number two, unnecessarily and knowingly causes or leads to suffering to other sentient agents with no concern as to their plight. Okay, well that's my stab at it, Sammy, that's my attempt, and I don't really want a lot of responses as to where this thing's wrong. I'm sure you can all pick holes in this definition, I'm sure you can pick shortcomings in this definition. In fact, I'll let you all into a little secret, I've actually picked a few shortcomings in it myself already. But for the purposes of this video, that doesn't matter, because I want to look beyond this. One of the reasons it doesn't matter, Sammy, is that if I was going to critique your position, I wouldn't be using this definition anyway. I would be critiquing the internal consistency of your position, so I'd need to use your definition, not my definition. The second reason that it's not that important in these terms, in terms of critiquing theism, is that I never, ever, ever bring up the problem of evil. However great an argument it is for atheists, it's not one that you will ever catch me using. I sometimes talk about the problem of suffering, which is an allied concept, but I always think bringing up evil when theists get into these muddy waters of free will is never a good argument to make in the first place. Much better to deal with natural disasters and suffering than to deal with evil. Note in my definition, adjective. Not a noun, Sammy. That's very, very important. You might regard evil as a tangible thing. Not tangible in the way that this table is tangible, but tangible in the way that energy is tangible. There is something there that you might not be able to pick it up, but it can neither be created nor destroyed. It can be accounted for. It can be counted. I don't believe that evil is that kind of a thing. When I use the term evil, I'm using it as an adjective, as a describing word. I am using it to describe a characteristic of a noun. That's very, very important. Okay, well now we're getting on to the bit of the video that I really want to make, where I can actually flesh out how I use the word, how I think of the term when I use it. I've already told you that I use it as an adjective. I don't think there's actually some tangible thing called evil. It's just a describing word. The first thing that I want to make clear, not only that I only use it as an adjective, but it's not just a simple case that you've got an objective definition, or at least you think you have, and I've got a subjective definition, but that your definition is objective and absolute, and mine is subjective and relative. And that relative aspect is very, very, very important. I need to give another example, one that's, because there are so many adjectives that we use that are subjective and relative, and none of them seem to be a problem to anybody. We all manage to live with that all the time, and we're happy with them as concepts, we're happy with them as words, until we come onto these hot words, these hot topics like evil and good, and then all of a sudden, unless we can be all objective and absolutist about it, it's a real problem. So let me take another word, another term and another scenario and apply the same ideas and the same scenarios to it. The example that I'm going to give is richness, Sammy. But before I go on to that, I just want to point out that one of the problems that theists bring up about this subjective thing is that it's the thin end of the wedge, that once we say it's subjective, we get what I'm going to call the Hitler and Stalin issue, which is, if you say it's subjective, well, that means that Hitler and Stalin, we can say that they're not evil, can't we? Because if it's subjective, anything goes, it's all up in the air, it's just anybody's opinion and it's totally baseless. Well, it perhaps would be if it wasn't relative. So richness, Sami. Let's look at richness and then let's look at that example in the context of richness. Sami, are you a rich man? SamiZataari, are you a rich man? I don't know how much money you've got. I'm talking about materialistic richness here. I could talk about spiritual richness. I'm not. Material richness. Are you a rich man? There are people in the world who would say SamiZataari is a rich man, most definitely. I haven't got a house. I can't afford to pay for healthcare. I can barely afford to feed my children, let alone myself. There's shit flowing down the middle of the street. SamiZataari has a house and a car. He can afford healthcare. He can afford to feed himself and his family. He is a rich man. And then there's the other guy living behind his remote control gates. He's got a huge garage with Rolls Royce and Bentleys in it. That's his mansion, but he's got another half a dozen houses in fantastic locations around the world. And he laughs at the idea that SamiZataari is a rich man. How can SamiZataari be a rich man when he's only got one car, when he lives in a small house that barely has a room that he doesn't use? Clearly, it's subjective. Richness is subjective, but it's also relative, Sami. And it's a good job it is. Because otherwise you'd throw the Hitler and Stalin issue at me and you would say, well, hang on a minute, richness can't be subjective, because if it was, then what's to stop us saying that Bill Gates and the Sultan of Brunei, we could say that they're not rich, couldn't we? We could say that they're poor, We could say that everybody's poor. But if we do that, we make the term meaningless, Sami. We render it meaningless. Richness is a relative term. And if you have a relative term, you have to have datums. You have to have people at both ends of the spectrum to compare it to. That is what you're basing it on. And these two men, the Sultan of Brunei and Bill Gates, they are archetypes. They are the pucker-dink prime examples of people who are rich. And in exactly the same way, in fact, let's look at this as a graphic, Sami. I think it might help if we looked at this as a graphic. Okay, Sami, so here is our graphic here. And what we're going to do, we're going to plot the number of people against their level of benevolence. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that this is going to follow some kind of normal distribution curve there, with most people of kind of average benevolence, and then as you get to the extremes, less and less people. You can see we've put Hitler and Stalin on the end there. And over this we're going to lay a couple of terms. We're going to overlay the terms good, and everybody to this side of the line is regarded as good, and we're going to put the term evil, and everybody to this side of the line is going to be termed evil. Now this is the thing, this is subjective. Everybody's going to have a different decision here, and some people, world's very black and white, and they kind of view it like this, that you're either good or you're evil. For most people, we don't regard that kind of thing. Most people kind of go a little bit like that some people are good, a number, maybe only a few people here are evil, and that most people lay somewhere in between. Now, what's being proposed here is that, well, what's to stop us dragging this evil bar all the way past here so that even the Hitlers and the Stalins don't class as evil, and then we could drag the good slider all the way over here. But the problem is that our benevolence on this subjective relative scale is defined by the characteristics of the population that make it up. So if we drag our sliders right over to the edge like that, what we actually do is we actually remove all our samples. We're going outside of the range. We're going outside of our datums. And as soon as we do that, we render the term absolutely meaningless. Okay, well I hope that's cleared it up a little bit, Sami, about this subjective relative position. The population and the spread of the population and those outliers are very, very important. The population is important. It's like tallness, isn't it? You know, what height constitutes a tall man? Very subjective. But one thing that isn't subjective is that Robert Pershing Wadlow, the tallest man that's ever lived, in terms of men, is a tall man. There's no getting away from that fact, because within that population, which is all men past and present that we know about, he is a tall man. If we increase the population, Sami, include elephants and giraffes and trees and make it all living things, then you can make a case that Robert Pershing Wadlow is not tall, because it's the population that defines these terms. Okay, well I think this video's gone on long enough, so I'm going to try and wrap it up now. And if you can think back, well literally if you can think back to the beginning, it seems a long time ago now. Before the video proper even started, I made a pretty bold claim, which was the total opposite of the theist's usual claim. The theist's usual claim is it's only with an objective definition of evil that we can say that Hitler and Stalin are guaranteed evil men, and that with a subjective definition we can't say that. And I offered you an argument for the opposite. I hope I've made half of that argument. The half of that argument is that a subjective approach, the terms are defined within the population, and those terms cannot go outside of that population. Hitler and Stalin are outliers, so whilst you can move the boundary of evil closer to Hitler and Stalin or further away than Hitler and Stalin, you can't go past them. They are the outliers. They will always remain evil men under that kind of definition. But under an objective definition, things are very different. An objective definition that comes from a deity that's ordained from above. God isn't hemmed in by the population by this kind of relativistic approach. He's an absolutist. He sets his level exactly where he wants. He can set his standard for evil at well worse deeds than Hitler or Stalin carried out. I mean, it's not as if he doesn't carry out worse deeds himself. He does. He wiped out nearly all life on Earth in a global flood. He sends people to burn in hell for eternity. Sending one person to burn in hell for all of eternity is worse than Hitler times Stalin. So God can set it wherever he wants, wherever he damn well likes, and it's only with that kind of objective model that we can say we really don't know whether Hitler and Stalin were evil men or not. Thank you for watching this video. Bye for now.